Happy Thursday. Welcome to So What, the Marketing Analytics and Insights live show. I'm Katie, joined by Chris and John. Welcome, fellas.
Hello.
It's nice to have everybody back.
I know.
Last week I was like, so quiet in here.
This week, we're talking about, can AI solve this problem? And so that's what we're going to be talking about. You know, there are different challenges that marketers run into, a lot of common problems, a lot of specific problems. And one of the questions that we get a lot, or that we see discussed a lot, is, you know, the appropriate uses of AI, you know, in those situations. So today, you know, if you're with us live, feel free to drop your questions in the comments. But basically, we're going to be covering if AI is an appropriate solution for various marketing challenges. So, Chris, where would you like to start?
Look at this pig.
Okay, that was really random.
So this is the output from a model called Stable Diffusion, which is an image generation piece of software. What it does, you give it a text prompt. I typed into this thing, a pig standing in a pile of money in a library, because I was writing a piece earlier on some politics stuff. And it generated this image. I used this for a blog post. So one of the very interesting problems that AI promises to solve, and can obviously realistically do it with this lovely image, is that for some types of content generation, it's a really good fit for stuff that's, you know, not super high risk, not super high, you know, value production, where you would probably just have used, you know, random clip art from the internet or something previously. Now you can have genuine custom built stuff that is tuned. Like setting up this photo shoot would be a really kind of a messy pain, right? To rent a pig, get a whole bunch of money, and then, you know, rent a library and do this. Whereas a machine has just done this for me, and it did it in about 6 or 7 minutes. So one of the, I think, most interesting applications of AI technology now is in the generation of new content that we can use to augment our existing content marketing capabilities.
So to go back to the question, does AI solve this problem? The problem being solved in this context is you want a specific image that you don't have time to take or generate yourself, and you don't want to run into copyright issues.
That's exactly right. The problem I want to solve is I want some custom artwork for some content that is unique, that is decent quality, that is fast, and that is relatively inexpensive.
Okay. So that's one very specific use case. You know, and so, you know, sort of the other side of that is, why wouldn't someone just use some of the, you know, royalty-free images? Is it because that, you know, everybody's using the same image of a laptop with a cup of coffee with a plant?
Exactly. And everyone's, you know, got that same awkward image of, you know, 3 people all smiling and shaking hands or whatever, or stuff like that. There's that. There is also the aspect that depending on the company you're dealing with, you don't know if the rights have actually been cleared for that image, right? The only rights that you are guaranteed to be clear on are either ones that have been generated by a machine that's under your control, or you have taken the photo or drawn or made the art yourself, right? If you take the photo with your camera in your living room, you know without a doubt who owns that copyright.
What do you think, John?
Yeah, for this kind of stuff, I mean, it definitely is an easy solution. You know, we see a lot of people going to stock art piles, and, you know, hopefully this will finally be the death of clip art. We can see see crappy garbage animations dry up and die up, you know, ultimately for good. So yeah, but Chris, how about though? I mean, how long did it take you to get that running? And I mean, I know you strung it all together. Like, how long do you think it's going to take before stuff like this becomes more commercially available?
Oh, it's commercially available now. OpenAI and their models have, you can sign up for their service, and you pay like 11 cents an image to have it generated for you. And you just have to be clear about the prompt. The version I used is, as expected, completely unsuitable for 99% of people.
You have to install. I was going to ask that question.
Exactly. So you spin up your Google Colab instance, you import the notebook, you run all the libraries, provision the instance, set up the GPU, and then you're ready to start typing stuff in. Now, here's the trade-off. Once Trust Insights pays a $9 a month fee for Google Colab, for Google Colab Pro, because I use it for a lot of very heavy machine learning processes, including image generation and text and stuff like that. The fee to generate all these images is essentially zero, right? Because we're paying for the instance anyway, and I can use it as many times as I want. If I was the average marketer who did not have machine learning technical skills, the 11 cents per image from OpenAI is reasonable. That is a reasonable thing, because if you think about it, how much would it cost you to have a designer design a custom image for every blog post, right? That's at least $1, 5 or 10 or $25, right? Or you end up doing a template like we do with a lot of our stuff, where we had a professional designer build a template for us, and then we just remix the words on it, but it's essentially the same image over and over and over again.
Right.
This allows you some level of customization while still being able to have stuff, and it's not just pictures of silly pigs, right? This is one I said, I want an image of a seaside town in Denmark. And again, for a piece of blog content, for a social media post or something, this is perfectly good enough. I sent this to a friend of mine who lives in Aalborg, and she was like, yeah, I mean, that pretty much looks like 2/3 of Denmark's towns. It is not any one town in general. Like, you will not find this on Google Maps anywhere. But it's close enough that if you were, say, a travel blog company or a travel company in general, this would be an easy way to source images. We have a travel client, and they're constantly running into issues of trying to images and image sizes and things. Well, just have the machine make it for you in exactly the specifications you want, and then you don't have to worry about, oh, we actually put up a 44 megabyte photo that our field photographer put up, and now our website's been penalized by Google's Core Web Vitals.
Oh, can you dial it in by size and resolution too? Can you specify what you actually want?
You can.
Oh, that's cool.
Okay, so
that's one challenge.
I was going to say, so it sounds like we've covered, unique images for content, or unique content, visually represented. So that's definitely one challenge where AI is an appropriate use. So we had asked our analytics for marketers community. It's our free Slack community, trustinsights.ai/analytics marketers. If you're interested in joining, totally free. We asked them what some of their marketing challenges are. And what we wanted to do is see, is AI an appropriate solution? So it's funny, the very first response that we got was talent. And so I feel like we need to pick it apart a little bit. So the hiring process, AI probably not the best use, unless you're culling through resumes. We can talk through sort of the pros and cons of that. But AI might be an appropriate solution depending on the job roles that you're trying to fill. So Chris, I can see you have a lot of thoughts on this. John, I'm sure you have some thoughts too. So Chris, what do we got?
I would say the appropriate use of AI in that context is to improve the productivity and remove tasks from your existing workforce to free people up to work on higher value tasks, right? If you've got, like, you and I used to work at this PR firm, and there's this one poor sucker who her job all day long was literally copying and pasting links from Google searches into a spreadsheet. Like, that is clearly a task that you don't even need AI for that. Just like straight up regular procedural programming will solve that problem, but AI will help you do a better job of filtering it, right? That is a task that AI can 100% solve. And then that person there, 40 hours a week, struggling not to claw their own eyeballs out, they can be put towards a better task. So you can get more efficiency out of your existing workforce. On the hiring front, AI, machines in general are always trained on existing data, and existing data has biases. Amazon found this out the hard way in 2018 when they deployed a service internally to filter through LinkedIn profiles to narrow down hiring pools, and the service immediately stopped recommending profiles of women. Just flat out stopped hiring women. Like, well, I can guess which data set you trained your data on, and it took them a little while to find this, enough so that it made the news. Like, it got out and it made the news. So anything where you're dealing with sensitive protected information, anything you're dealing with protected classes of any kind, age, gender, sexual orientation, veteran status, disability, you want to be real careful about what you're doing with it, and just not turning the data over to machines, because that's where very large lawsuits lay.
All right, John, what do you got?
Yeah, there's, I'm just kind of interested in some of the applications as far as intelligent advertising, I mean, stuff that existing advertising teams can use on all the different platforms that they don't have to do any work. They're just taking advantage of better placed Facebook ads. We saw a thing recently with Twitter. Their ads for trying to drive traffic to apps has become more and more automated. So those are the easy hits that I'm watching, and require no technical knowledge whatsoever on the entire team. Never mind, just the person doing it. So that's always the easy lifts that I'm looking for. And then, another one that just is on the horizon that I've been watching and waiting for to kind of take a bigger role is all the internationalization stuff. So much of translating websites and content into other languages and other cultures or whatever, having all that stuff automated. I mean, and to be honest, I haven't even kept up with that field in the past year, so I don't know if that's continuing to move and if there's stuff off the shelf now that's decent, but that's just another one that I have on my wish list.
That's very decent. At the Spark conference this year, when I spoke in Montenegro, the native language there is Serbian. And one of the things that's great, built right into PowerPoint. Like, you don't have to use any external tools. As long as your PowerPoint's got a microphone and it's got the internet connection, you can not only have it automatically subtitle your talk as you're speaking on stage, but real-time translate it. So as I was talking in English to this audience, PowerPoint was translating what I was saying into Serbian closed captions right on screen. That level of accessibility and stuff is so cool. And like I said, it's built right in. You use zero technical skill whatsoever. You just got to find the button in PowerPoint to turn that on, and you are good to go in the language of your choosing.
All right, so it sounds like the consensus about using AI for finding new talent is, dependent on what kind of talent you're trying to find, what kind of tasks. John, as you mentioned, advertising, there may be uses of AI that you can implement, which would then mean you wouldn't need to add more of a headcount. In terms of hiring the people, probably not the best use of AI. You probably still want that human sort of judgment, which that comes with its own set of issues. But AI being programmed by humans is probably not the best use of AI in that context.
The one exception I will say is we did some work for a client a few years ago where we took 17,000 of their phone call interviews, what their recruiters did, had them all transcribed, and then did some language processing to see what recruiters and candidates were talking about versus what was the language in their job ads. And what we found was that everything in their job ads was none of what the candidates cared about. Like, the candidates were all like, no, we care about, starting cents per mile, am I home on the weekends, and all this stuff. And when we gave that feedback back to the client, said, hey, you need to change your job ads. You need to talk about these things because that's what all your recruiters and candidates are talking about with you on the phone. They did, and they saw a 40% increase in applications, like literally overnight.
So AI can certainly help you focus in on what you're hiring for. But again, sort of the people themselves. I think the conclusion that we're coming to is that AI is not the appropriate solution for the actual hiring process. All right, so the next marketing challenge that we were given was gaps in the data. And so thinking about your, sales and marketing funnel from awareness all the way to purchase or enrollment in this case, I think this is a common challenge for a lot of people because their data lives in a bunch of different systems. And depending on how you're collecting the data, you may not be collecting contact information right from the get-go. You may be collecting it, 5 or 6 steps down the line. So you then can't connect it back to the original, how did they find out about us? So lay it on me, Chris. Where does AI fit into this one?
In this case, well, there's two things the issue. One is that there's not enough data. So in this particular instance, from our analytics for marketers Slack group, the person in question doesn't have enough data to work with yet, and they need to collect more of that. So that's one of the major challenges. But one of the outcomes there that is possible without individual data is a tactic called marketing mix modeling. This is using software, machine learning powered software that, and we've talked about this a bunch of times on the show in the past, that it essentially ingests all of the data that you have about your marketing and your outcomes and all the activities you're doing, and then performs essentially a regression analysis that says these are the channels that have the biggest impact on the outcome. It's very similar to attribution analysis, but not quite the same thing, because attribution analysis requires some more granular data. Marketing mix modeling can be done with more summary level data, and you can still get valid conclusions out of it. And so in this case, if you have the data, and it's even if it's a bunch of heterogeneous systems that are all over the place, you can unify that data into essentially what's just one really big spreadsheet, and then build a marketing mix model from that, so that you can say, okay, these are all the inputs. Here's the output. Tell me which of these inputs matters the most.
So I am going to respectfully disagree with you that AI is the appropriate use here. When I see this problem, I see this as a people and a process problem, not a technology problem, because what you're describing still doesn't answer the question of where did this person come from? What did their individual journey look like? And so to me, that's a process issue, that there weren't clearly defined requirements from the get-go to say, this is how we plan to track John Wall from finding out about us to enrolling in our program. AI can't fix that. AI can't go backward in time and say, okay, let me just go trace this person down all over the internet and figure out everything they've ever done, and then only pull out what's relevant to your specific, product. So I respectfully disagree that AI is the solution here. I think it's a people and process problem. John, tiebreaker?
Yeah. Well, the big thing with that is it kind of depends on what situation are you in. I mean, obviously, if you want to cure the disease, yeah, you've got to go back and figure out where the people process problem is. If this is some kind of one-time thing where you're just trying to backfill data, which, you screwed something up and somebody threw away, one of the spreadsheets you need to complete the data, then AI is your thing. But kind of squarely in the middle of that is using AI for data hygiene. You could come to a point where you say, this is the kind of stuff we're going to try and get, but most of the time we won't get it. So let's use AI to supplement it. But yeah, always get it from the people if you can first. Obviously, you may be 98% accurate, but it's still cheaper to get it up front.
Yeah. Now, to your point, Katie, getting it from people is going to be vitally important, because what we're seeing happen now, and the pace is increasing, is data blindness. So CNIL, which is the French data protection agency, is part of the overall European Commission, essentially just ruled two separate rulings, one of which says you may not use Google Analytics in the EU anymore, period. Like, say, nope, you're done. So that is Google has obviously appealed that, but it is not looking particularly good for any marketing company collecting data without very, very specific privacy parameters around it. Mm-hmm. And the second thing that the European Commission itself ruled is that any PII, any personally identifiable information, is now reclassed within the entire EU as sensitive protected information, which means that it has the same protections on it as if it was someone's sexual orientation. So just having someone's IP address or email is treated with the same level of sensitivity as someone's gender or someone's ethnicity, which is a really big deal, because as you go up in levels from personally identifiable to sensitive protected to protected health information and so on and so forth, the legal repercussions increase and the stringency of your own data protection increases, which means that we have to be looking at AI models to work with less and less data, less and less person identifiable data, until essentially we're going to have almost none at all, except for the outcomes that we can see and the activities that we've done. So AI is not the answer to this, as you point out, is not the answer in this situation, but it is very quickly going to have to be the default solution in a privacy friendly environment if you want to avoid the European Commission, kicking you out of Europe.
Well, and I don't want to get too off track, but we're also, talking about the quote unquote cookieless future, where marketers who aren't creating things that are convincing people to give some of that personally identifiable information are basically going to be screwed. So if you're just putting something out there, a half written blog post, and you're like, oh, I don't know, I can't figure out why nobody cares about this thing. Why aren't people signing up for it? Like, that's a you problem. That's not, your audience problem. You have not done your job as a marketer. And again, that's not something that AI is going to fix. AI can't fix your crappy content. Now, we could go down the road of saying AI can generate content, but Google just rolled out, and I apologize if I'm misquoting Chris, you can feel free to correct me. The human, basically what they're saying is like they want human generated content, not AI generated content. And so that further sort of, if you're relying on AI to generate your content and you're relying on, retargeting pixels and cookies to collect information, like, you're screwed.
Yeah, the helpful content update
Helpful content.
is John and I were talking about this earlier this week as well. Google has made it very clear that the content you create should be helpful. It should add value, right? They targeted specific examples like roundup blog posts that don't add anything new, lists of lists and stuff like that. Essentially, it's all the mediocre content that a lot of marketers have been cranking out crap for a while. Where this is going to get very interesting is the language generation models are very sophisticated, extremely heavy, very, very powerful. And what they create is getting harder and harder to distinguish from human written content, particularly when we look at things that like human content farms generate. So if you have a human here that is paid, minimum wage, they hate their job and whatever, they just phone it in a face roll on the keyboard Monday through Friday, and that's their level of quality. And you have a machine with a language generation model that creates mediocre content. Right? It's okay, it's mediocre. It's better than the human content. So even though this is the human content, the machine's creating better stuff. And so as these models improve, and the newest model, the Da Vinci model from OpenAI, I was testing it the other day. It's not bad, right? We've gone from, wow, that's terrible, that's word salad machine, thanks a lot, to mediocre, like, okay, this is the exact same blog post I've seen written on 400 other blogs, to, okay, that's reasonable, that's useful, that's helpful, and the bar of excellence for what AI can generate is getting higher and higher, which means that Google itself will have a harder time distinguishing if the content is truly helpful. Does it matter whether a human or a machine wrote it? The signals they look at are things like bounce rate and clicks and stuff like that. It's one of the reasons why we all had to install Google Analytics. They can see the behaviors of users, and if users are interacting with AI generated content with the same performance metrics or better performance metrics than humans ones do, they're going to have a very, very hard time detecting it. So I would say the moral of the story there is, yes, your content has to be helpful. Your content has to be good. Whether a machine generates it or a human generates it, or a machine does the first draft and a human polishes it, or whatever the case may be, ultimately you have to produce quality, which goes back to what you were saying earlier, Katie, which is you've got to give people a reason to at least click, right? You see a picture of a pig standing on money. Okay, a machine generated that, but that's still mildly amusing. That might be enough to get the click, even if it's completely machine generated.
What do you think, John?
Yeah, it's, there's no saving crappy content. I think that's the biggest point of all that. And yeah, you can come up with all these tools and have marginal generated copy. And it is good for certain situations if you're just trying to get tonnage of reporting stuff out there. And one thing we had talked about earlier this week, there is definitely going to be a full-on war over product reviews, because this kind of technology can be used to generate product reviews. So you can get that, 2,000 4 or 5-star reviews that you're looking for. But yeah, none of it is a substitution for, really knowing what you're doing and having the pillar content be stuff that's remarkable and unique, because it's, and there's going to be way too much, 8 out of 10 content out there.
So we actually got a comment which reinforces what we're saying. So Scott Sweeney over from LinkedIn said AI content created by natural language generation is best when designed and edited with humans, which is absolutely correct. The way that I look at systems that generate content for you, there still needs to be that human intervention. It's the same thing with creating any kind of AI. The humans need to decide what it's going to do. The humans need to decide whether or not it's acceptable. And the humans need to be the ones to put the final polish on. It's the same thing with your image, Chris. You, the human, said, this is the image that I specifically want. Now, I'm guessing, this is just a wild guess, but I'm guessing that there are going to be systems that will read your content and decide what kind of an image is appropriate. And that's fine. But without that human QA, you may end up with really bonkers images that have nothing to do because AI won't be able to detect nuance and sarcasm and those kinds of things. And you may end up with images that are wildly inappropriate for what you were trying to do. And so if you aren't then, as a human, QAing it, then you're still right back where you started, where you're putting out crappy content.
Exactly. No, you're 100% right. And believe me, in the first few trial runs of the new software, I was like, whoa, that's interesting. Because when you download the version to run for Colab on itself, it doesn't have any of the safeties that are built into the online version. So you're like, whoa, that's exciting. But here's another example of this. So this is the Da Vinci model. Katie, this is your cold open from the newsletter yesterday. I just put it in here. And I told this model, do a TLDR, write a quick summary. And that's essentially what it just did there. It says, okay, if I summarize this entire post, it comes down to most problems start with people. So if you're having trouble with something, start with who made it, right? You didn't say those exact words, but that is essentially what it distills down to. That's pretty good. From a content perspective, one of the things that we've been talking about with Trust Insights is how do we, create those featured snippets, for our blog posts that go into our little SEO tool on our site. That's not a bad little summary, right? That could go in there. So there's all these opportunities.
So what's interesting is I had a sentence that was essentially that in the post. And so it didn't, I guess, and that's where I'm like, well, it didn't generate anything new. It didn't summarize it. It literally just grabbed a sentence from the post itself. It wasn't that exact sentence, but it was basically that.
Yep. So here's a different pull from it. Yeah, it's just doing abstractive summarization. It's attempting to boil it down to just a couple of sentences. And I think, to Scott's point and to what you're saying, the human is the conductor of the orchestra now, right? So we have all these tools can do these things, but they don't do it by themselves, and nor do you want them to. We want instead for us to be guiding them.
Well, I can see how this summarization tool is actually going to be pretty helpful, because if you write a post and then you ask for that summary from AI, if AI can't figure out what the heck this post is about, humans probably can't figure out what the heck this post is about too. So I can see it as a really good QA, part of your QA process. For writing your content, which goes back to John's point, is like, you can't fix crappy content. Like, you have to do the work. You can't get by with just sort of the bare minimum. And so using AI to support but not replace, I think, is what we're all saying.
100%
yeah, another
right.
thing with that though that I do is, anything where if it's not your algorithm, you want to check the stuff before it goes out the door, because you have no idea what kind of bias or weirdness is in there if you didn't write it. So human touch is critical before it goes out the door.
Yeah, for all you know, there's somewhere along the line some angry engineer who knew nobody would be checking the code and said, anytime someone says marketing, replace it with a not safe for work word. And because you're just using, whatever you bought out of the box, you have no way to fix it. So definitely buyer beware. All right. So we've covered, well, we kind of got a little bit off topic, but basically the question that we were covering was, following someone through their user journey. Um, AI can fix some of that as privacy gets more strict. You'll be able to do some generalizations about your marketing mix, but following one specific individual through their journey is going to get harder and harder and harder unless you are creating things that are compelling enough that someone says, yes, you can have all you want to know about me because you have created something that I cannot live without. So the next marketing challenge is definitely an interesting one. One of our community members said, Google Analytics 4, everything about it is a challenge. And I don't disagree with that. Google, in case you missed it, for some reason, Google announced earlier this year that Google Analytics 4 was going to become the standard piece of software as of July 1st, 2023. So if you have not installed it yet, you are behind. You will not have a full year's worth of data. Go back to any of our old shows. You can find out where we rant and rave about, Google Analytics 4 versus Universal Analytics. You can take our Google Analytics 4 course where we help you solve all of these problems. Do it sooner rather than later. Again, time is of the essence. So, all of that being said, artificial intelligence, does that help with Google Analytics 4 being a pain in the butt? Chris, you're muted.
It doesn't help with being a pain in the butt, but it does help with processing the data that Google Analytics gives us. Remember that this is a big architecture change. Google Analytics used to be sort of a Swiss Army knife: collect your data, analyze it, report on it. And it does only one of those things now. It's an analysis tool. It's also a really, really good engine for processing data. But a lot of the things that we used to value about it, like page value, gone, right? It's not in there anymore. So you have to process it yourself. One of the things I was working on last week that I finally got working after beating my head against the wall for a couple of months on it is we do this thing called most valuable pages, which with the old Universal Analytics was a relatively straightforward thing. What pages, help nudge people towards conversion? And the Google Analytics 3 Universal Analytics model, data model, was really good at that. All of the data that we relied on is no longer there in those formats in Google Analytics 4. So we had to totally re-engineer the thing, but we finally got it working. Unfortunately, it requires a much more advanced machine learning model to process it, and it takes a lot longer too. But machine learning can absolutely take data out of Google Analytics 4 and slice it and dice it until you get to a point where, now we can have something we can take action on. So from the Trust Insights website, I said, run this classification model. Tell me which pages nudge people towards conversion. And we basically compare user journeys where people did convert versus user journeys where people didn't convert, and look at the pages that they did in each one and say, okay, what's the difference? And so for our website for the last, I think it was the last 90 days, the LinkedIn job hunting webinar was a big one. The 5 ways AI is changing marketing keynote, the fundamentals of marketing analytics. Some of the pages that didn't do as much, like the homepage of the podcast, didn't really do as much. So from a use case perspective, there are absolutely ways that Google Analytics 4 data can be used. AI can be used on this data to make it useful, because that's one of the biggest handicaps with GA4 is that the analysis that's in the product doesn't answer questions that your average marketer's user story wants them to answer.
Which I think is valid, but I do think that applying AI is almost getting ahead of the problem, which is the whole interface and experience with Google Analytics 4 is changed, and they've pulled apart the products to be Tag Manager, Google Analytics, Data Studio, et cetera, et cetera. And so AI can't fix that necessarily.
Nope.
AI won't be able to set up your system exactly the way you need it to be set up with all of the different toggles and settings and everything. So to get to the point where you can use AI to analyze the data is like step 5. Step 1 is you first have to set up the different systems. So AI can't fix that. That's still a people and process problem.
Exactly. And it's a people and process problem. It's also a platform problem in that Google has made this platform change for their benefit and not ours.
Hmm.
And because we're not paying for it, we don't really get a vote into making any changes to it. We just kind of have to live with it or switch up and change to a different product.
So Google Analytics 4, that's a people and process problem. You can apply AI once you have it set up and you're collecting data, but not until.
Mm-hmm.
John, as we're starting to wrap up, what are some of the other marketing challenges you see as you're talking to people in your network, as you're talking to prospects, that, you know, we're not sure where AI quite fits in?
I think on the SEO front, there's a bunch of places where we've looked at stuff, whether it's analyzing topics to understand who the leader in the space is, who you should be emulating, trying to, take back ground that you've lost, and what content of yours is doing well. A lot of that kind of stuff is well suited to machine learning analysis, because just looking at your own traffic is not enough. You need to have a rough idea of how the competition's doing and how topics that aren't on your keyword list or that you're not getting traffic for are working. So yeah, that's a lot of the low hanging fruit, or whatever business analogy you want to use. But if you want to get in and you generate some data and make some things happen, I think that's the best place to start for that kind of stuff. And of course, we do that for clients as far as traffic analysis and helping them do content calendaring. Figure out not only what to talk about, well, when's the best time to talk about it. You don't want to be creating content about getting ready for the beach in November. You want to time that stuff for April, May, June, and that there are trends and things to follow for virtually every kind of topic like that.
So yeah,
Pumpkin
AI.
spice squishmallows.
No.
Pumpkin spice for everyone.
No. So AI is definitely a good use case for things like SEO, analyzing your SEO. And again, so I feel like we keep circling back to content being the thing that kind of ties all of these, questions together, these challenges, which is true, because content comes in a lot of different forms. Content, video, audio, written, images, whatever. AI can do a lot of that. However, you still need human intervention in order to ensure that the content is good quality, that the content aligns with, what you want it to do, what your brand wants to do, what your audience wants to see. So AI is, at least from where I sit, AI shouldn't be front and center. AI is a supporting role. AI is a, secondary character, because it's not going to fix all of these problems for you if you don't have your people, process, and platform squared away first.
Yeah, it's just an appliance.
Mm-hmm.
You still need a chef. You still need ingredients. You still need a recipe. Those things don't change. Just the appliances have gotten better. AI is good at three things, right? Classification, aka I've got a bunch of stuff, help it make sense of it. Regression, which is I've got a set of numbers, what numbers are like it, and generation. Hey, make this thing. Right? Those are the three fundamental tasks that AI is really good at. So as we look at our marketing, we have to say, is this a regression problem, a classification problem? Is it a generation problem? Or if it's none of those, then that's probably not a good use case for AI, right? Hiring people is not one of those three problems, right? When you look at configuring Google Analytics 4, it's not one of those three problems. Creating content, it is. Content calendar, forecasting, absolutely. Identifying trends in social media, yes, that's regression. What number is like this number? So if we think about our problems as one of those three categories, we can very quickly bucket and say, yes, there's a potential for AI to help here, or no, it's not the right tool. It's right. You're making steak and you've pulled out the blender. Put that away. That's not what it's for.
Yeah, that just sounds gross, quite honestly. I don't know if anyone else caught it, but John, I did see your camera glitch for a hot second, so I'm pretty sure that we just exposed that John is in fact an AI avatar.
An AI.
And so instead of actually hiring John Wall, we created an AI avatar of John Wall so that John Wall wouldn't have to sit in these live streams.
Max Headroom 3.0. That's what I'm doing here.
There's a throwback.
It's funny because that's what I was thinking of when I saw it too. So I think we're all aligned.
Yes.
any final thoughts on can AI fix this problem? John?
There's definitely applications. Don't go out and just buy the first thing that says AI on it, though. That's a bad idea.
Chris?
No, that is 100% true. Understand the kind of problem that you're facing first, and then you can make those determinations really, really quickly, whether it's the right tool or not. But understand that the technology is changing so fast, and the scope of what it can do is increasing so quickly that you should reevaluate that list of problems maybe once a quarter and say, oh, well, this is a problem that AI now can solve.
I think that makes sense. I would add to that, AI, it's not going to fix a broken process. It's not going to fix non-existent process. It's not going to fix, your inability to collect the right data. So these things, you all have to have that human intervention first. People define what AI is going to do, not the other way around.
Until Skynet.
I think we're done.
All right, folks. We'll see you next week. Thanks for watching today. Be sure to subscribe to our show wherever you're watching it. For more resources and to learn more, check out the Trust Insights podcast at trustinsights.ai/TI podcast and a weekly email newsletter at trustinsights.ai/newsletter. Got questions about what you saw in today's episode? Join our free Analytics for Marketers Slack group at trustinsights.ai/analytics for marketers. See you next time.